I found a dried petal between the pages of an old notebook this morning. It crumbled when I touched it, just a whisper of pink that used to be soft and fragrant, like a memory that stayed too long. That's how love feels to me now. Once I wrote letters so full of devotion that the ink itself seemed to shimmer with longing. I pressed flowers into the folds, sealed them with kisses. Sometimes I sprayed them lightly with perfume, foolishly believing that scent could travel through paper and land on his skin. He kept them all, at least at first. I saw them in a drawer once, carefully bundled with a silk ribbon, like something too delicate to throw away, but not precious enough to read twice. Now I write in a diary, small neat lines written when the house is still and the windows hum with wind. I write not because anyone will read it, but because if I don't, I might dissolve. It's like bleeding in private quiet, controlled not to worry anyone. My thoughts are not poems anymore. They are lists of things I wish I could say without being looked at like I've lost my mind. They are confessions I whisper only to the page. I tell my diary everything I used to tell him, except now I don't need to smile while I'm doing it. I don't need to make it pretty. The first time I realized he didn't love me anymore, I was standing in the hallway holding a letter I had just written. I had folded it carefully, like always. But this time I paused. I looked at it and asked myself, what would he even do with this? Now I knew he wouldn't open it. I knew it would be left somewhere on the counter or tucked under something else and forgotten. So I didn't give it to him. I put it in the drawer beside my bed under my wool socks, and I cried. Not loud, not dramatic, just a soft, exhausted weeping like something old breaking gently. There are people who will say marriage changes, that love matures, that romance fades and becomes something deeper, more spiritual. Maybe that's true, but what I felt wasn't maturity. It was absence. The kind that echoes when you speak and no one answers. We used to leave each other notes, little scribbles on napkins, messages on the bathroom mirror. Don't forget the milk. You looked beautiful this morning. Once he left me a haiku about my eyes. Now he leaves dishes in the sink and silence. I think he believes we're fine, that this is just what life becomes after a certain age. Two people living under the same roof, paying bills, sharing chores, like quiet roommates. But I still remember what it was like when he reached for my hand just because, when my laughter made him look at me with awe, when he used to say my name like it was a prayer. He doesn't say my name anymore, not even when he's angry. So I write it myself. Sometimes I write my name in the margins just to remember I exist, just to prove to myself that someone still thinks of me even if that someone is just me. The hardest part isn't the loneliness. It's the mourning of someone who is still alive and still in the room with you. It's watching him stir his tea while you stare at him and realize he hasn't looked at you once all morning. It's remembering the way he used to touch your back in the grocery store line and feeling that ghost of a hand where nothing touches now. But I'm not angry, not really. I think anger would require energy I no longer have. I'm tired in that bone-deep way that makes even breathing feel like an act of defiance. I no longer write to bring him closer. I write to keep myself from slipping too far away. Last night, I wrote in the dark, just a few lines. I wrote, "You were the first man I ever wrote poetry for, and the last to ever ask for it." He'll never read it. He doesn't even know I still write. But I do. The kitchen used to be our sanctuary. He'd sit at the table thumbing through the newspaper while I stirred the pot and hummed something from our youth, usually a song we used to dance to, back when dancing didn't hurt my knees. That kitchen was our rhythm, our routine, our language. Mornings were full of clinks and chatter, buttered toast and shared glances, the kind of domestic poetry you don't even notice you're living inside of until it goes silent. Now I cook in near quiet. I talk to the kettle out of habit. I ask the frying pan if it misses bacon. Sometimes I forget that he's even in the next room. There's a wall between us not made of brick, but of pauses, long, awkward pauses that never used to exist. I place his coffee in front of him, just like always. Same cup, same spot, same teaspoon of sugar. But the thanks are gone. The eye contact is gone. He doesn't even look up anymore. He just sips and stares past me as though I've become the wallpaper. I remember a morning years ago, maybe 10, maybe more. I burned the toast and dropped the butter. He laughed, pulled me in, said, I looked like a war zone in an apron. He kissed my cheek with marmalade on his lips. I laughed too, swatted at him with a dish towel, and we danced a ridiculous little shuffle in the middle of the linoleum floor. That memory has kept me warm more nights than I care to admit. But it feels like it happened to someone else. Someone with brighter eyes, and a man who still noticed her. Now I sit across from him, and all I hear is the sound of a spoon hitting ceramic. Tap, tap, stir, silence. I clear my throat, sometimes hoping he'll ask me something, anything. But he never does. And I've stopped trying to fill the gaps with empty words. I used to ask about his day. Used to ask if he liked the dinner. Now I don't bother. He doesn't answer, or he answers in grunts. A nod, a shrug, a dismissive hum. The thing about silence is that it's not neutral. It weighs things down. It starts to feel like a verdict. I sit in it long enough and I start wondering if maybe I was too much, too clingy, too sensitive, too emotional. That's what he used to say when I cried about nothing. You're too emotional. As if feeling was something I should have outgrown, like acne or fairy tales. I remember once long ago he came home with a bouquet of wildflowers. No reason, just because. He said he saw them on the roadside and thought of me. That kind of tenderness, it lingers in the bones. It stains the memory in beautiful ways. But now, even when I place fresh flowers on the table, he doesn't notice. I could set the table on fire, and he'd probably just ask if I turned the stove off. Sometimes I want to scream, not out loud, just inside. I want to shake him and say, do you see me? Do you remember what we were? But instead, I fold the napkins, refill the sugar bowl, and sweep the crumbs that fall from his toast. That's how love dies, I think, not in great explosions, but in neglected details, in mornings that feel like chores, in conversations that never begin. He used to joke that I couldn't stop talking, that he fell in love with my stories. Now, when I begin a sentence, he sighs, not cruelly, just habitually, like he's bracing for another wave of noise he'd rather avoid. So I've learned to keep my stories short, and then I learned not to tell them at all. This morning I told the sugar jar that I dreamed about the ocean. I laughed a little after I said it out loud to a ceramic jar. I'm not going mad. I just miss being heard. I miss my own voice reflected back to me in someone else's eyes. So I write. I write what I would have said over breakfast. I write my thoughts on the color of the sunrise, on the smell of cinnamon, on the ache in my back. I write it all down because if I don't, the silence might consume me completely. And every morning I still place his coffee in front of him, not because he thanks me, not because he notices, but because some habits are stitched into the fabric of who I am. Maybe one day he'll look up again, maybe not. Either way, I'll be here whispering my stories to the tea kettle in the morning light. There was a time when I waited for the mail like a schoolgirl waits for spring. I'd write him letters when he traveled for work, even if he was only gone for a few days. I'd pour myself into them, handwritten with a fountain pen, carefully folded, sprayed with a touch of perfume, sealed with a kiss that always felt real. And when his reply came, my heart would flutter. His handwriting on the envelope was enough to make me blush. I'd read his words slowly, then again and again until I nearly memorized them. But that was a long time ago. Now the letters I write never leave the house. They sit stacked in my drawer, a quiet graveyard of unsent affection. I no longer expect replies. The last letter I gave him, and by gave I mean I left it in his suitcase for a business trip 6 years ago, came back unread. Still folded, still sealed, wedged between shirts, like an accident. When I asked about it, he barely shrugged. Didn't get to it, he said, like it was a flyer or a menu. I didn't cry then, not on the outside, but something inside me sagged like a porch beam, too long in the rain. I told myself maybe he was just tired, maybe he forgot. But love doesn't forget, and even if it does, it apologizes. He didn't. He just moved on like nothing had happened while I stood there wondering how a kiss on paper could feel so rejected. I used to write him love letters just because I missed him, even if he was only at the grocery store. Now I write out of a need to remember what love once sounded like, when it came from my own mouth. I reread the old ones, sometimes the ones from the early days. I keep them in a small box tied with ribbon. His too, the ones he wrote me. There aren't many, but they're enough to remind me that once we were both reaching. I read one the other day that began, "I don't deserve you." I used to laugh at that brush it off, but now I wonder if he meant it in a way I didn't hear at the time. Maybe it was a confession. Maybe he knew he wouldn't keep reaching forever. I tried to keep it alive, the spark, the softness. I wrote him small notes and left them in his coat pockets. I love you. Dinner's your favorite tonight. Come find me. I miss your smile. He never said anything about them, never even let on that he found them. I pretended not to notice, but every time I slipped one in, it felt a little more like begging, and I was never one to beg. The silence between us grew thicker, more permanent. There were no arguments, no fights, just layers of dust on our words. And that's what's so difficult to explain to others, that neglect doesn't always look like cruelty. Sometimes it looks like nothing at all. Just absence. Just empty chairs and unread notes and smiles that go unanswered. There was one moment I remember it too well. I had just written a longer letter, pages and pages, about how I felt us drifting. I placed it carefully on his desk, hoping the words would reach him more gently than my voice could. He walked in, picked it up, glanced at the pages, and set it down without reading. Another one he muttered almost to himself. Then he left the room. That was the last letter I ever gave him. From that day on, I stopped writing to him and started writing for me. My letters changed shape. They became diary entries, poems, prayers. Not meant to be read, only meant to be felt, and they kept me afloat. The pages of my diary are worn now, soft at the corners, some tear-stained, some smudged with ink from nights I couldn't stop writing. I talk to him there in those pages, but I don't wait for an answer. It's a strange kind of peace knowing he won't reply. I can be honest that way. I can say what I really feel without the burden of hoping for change. In one entry I wrote, "Today I passed a couple on the street holding hands. I remembered what that used to feel like. I think I miss being chosen, not just tolerated." I don't show him the diary. He wouldn't ask about it anyway. But I wonder sometimes what he'd feel if he read even a single page. Would he recognize the woman inside it? Would he feel regret? Or would he turn the page and feel nothing at all? So many years spent writing love into someone who no longer has a place to hold it. But I still write, because it's the only place I still speak without shrinking. The decline wasn't sudden. That's what people often get wrong. They think love disappears like a storm, loud, dramatic, full of shouting and slammed doors. But for us, it was quieter. like water slowly draining from a tub you didn't know had a crack. I didn't realize how empty we'd become until I caught myself talking more to the plants than to my husband. It started with small things. He began spending more time on his phone or in the garage or sitting in front of the television with that faraway look. I told myself it was just a phase, just stress. Everyone goes through rough patches, don't they? But then weeks passed without any tenderness. And then months. Conversations dwindled to logistics, what groceries we needed when the bills were due. No more. How was your day? No more asking what I was thinking or dreaming or needing. I tried to reach him. I'd sit beside him on the couch, gently brush my hand against his. He wouldn't pull away, but he wouldn't hold it either. It just sat there limp, like a forgotten thing. I'd look at his face and wonder where the man I married had gone. The one who used to chase me up the stairs, whisper secrets in my ear, kiss the top of my head, like he was claiming a small piece of heaven. I started to notice the way he lit up when other people spoke to him, strangers at the hardware store, cashiers, neighbors. His smile returned for them. His voice was animated, full of laughter and stories, and when he came home, that version of him disappeared. What he brought home was the shell, the quiet, the closed door. Once I followed him out to the garden, where he'd been tinkering for hours. I brought him a cold drink and stood in the doorway watching. He was on the phone. His voice was low but not tense, soft, familiar. There was a lilt in his laugh I hadn't heard in years. I didn't know who was on the other end. I didn't ask. I couldn't. Something inside me froze. I placed the glass on the porch railing and walked back inside before he saw me. I never brought it up. There wasn't even anything concrete to accuse, just a feeling, a slow unraveling, the sense that whatever he once gave me had been redirected elsewhere, maybe to a person, maybe just to a dream of escape. But I knew in that moment that his emotional life no longer included me. That night I wrote in my diary until my hand cramped. I remember the last line, I feel like a house he used to live in, one he still visits out of obligation, but no longer calls home. The next day I stopped putting on lipstick. I stopped checking the mirror twice. Not out of anger, out of surrender. I started dressing in soft clothes, worn fabrics that didn't need approval. I wanted to be invisible because I already was. There's a specific kind of heartbreak that comes from being slowly erased, from living in the same space with someone who used to light up when you walked in and now barely flinches. I remember tiptoeing around my own home, afraid to disturb the peace to spark annoyance. I wasn't afraid of yelling. No, what I feared was the indifference, the shrug, the empty glance that said, "I don't care enough to fight with you." And yet I still held out hope. For a long time I believed a touch, a moment, a memory might bring us back. I'd try to revive us with little surprises, his favorite dessert, an old song on the stereo. But he never noticed. Or maybe he noticed and didn't care. One night I sat beside him on the porch and told him I missed him. I said it gently, like someone extending an olive branch in a war that never really began. He nodded, said, "Yeah," then changed the subject to the weather. I sat there in silence for a long time, listening to the crickets, feeling the heat rise up through the wood, beneath my feet, and realized I was mourning something that was already gone. That was the night I stopped trying to win him back. The shift wasn't loud. It was like closing a book you'd been reading for years only to realize the story ended many chapters ago, and you were just rereading the same pages, hoping for a different ending. There's a shirt hanging in the closet that I used to spray with my perfume before he packed for business trips. It was his favorite blue, with faint white stripes soft at the collar from too many washes. I remember how he'd smile when he put it on, how he'd say, "Smells like home," and kiss my forehead before walking out the door. That same shirt now hangs untouched. I moved it the other day and found dust gathering at the shoulders. He doesn't travel anymore, not for work, not for pleasure, but that shirt still hangs there like a memory trying to stay alive. I leave it there maybe out of habit, or maybe because I don't know what else to do with it. It's strange how certain things hold more meaning when they're no longer used. I used to take such care with his things. I'd iron his shirts meticulously, fold his socks into perfect little rolls, make sure his lunch was packed with a handwritten note. Good luck today. I'm proud of you. Can't wait to hear how it went. I did those things not because I had to, but because love made it feel like a joy, not a task. Now his shirts go untouched. He does his own laundry sometimes, though he never folds it, just tosses it in drawers. The last time I offered to help, he said, "Don't worry about it. I've got it." But it wasn't the words. It was the way they landed, like a closed door, like I don't need you anymore. Sometimes I still spray perfume before bed, not for him, but for myself, a scent that reminds me of the girl I used to be, the one who believed in handwritten letters and home-cooked dinners, and the kind of kisses that lingered even after the door closed behind him. She still lives inside me somewhere. I can feel her curled up in the folds of old routines. There's a sadness that comes from being forgotten in plain sight, not dramatic, just constant, a slow erosion of identity. I used to be his everything, his reason to come home. Now I'm just part of the furniture, part of the routine expected but unseen. One afternoon, I found an old box in the attic filled with little keepsakes from our early years, ticket stubs, postcards, dried flowers wrapped in tissue. My handwriting was everywhere. His voice echoed in those scraps of ink and fading color. I sat there with the box in my lap and felt like I was staring at evidence from a life I once had access to, a museum of our love curated by someone who no longer exists. I wrote about it that night. There's something cruel about nostalgia. It shows you what was possible, then reminds you of what no longer is. When I see his shirts lying in a heap now wrinkled and forgotten, I don't feel anger. I feel absence. I feel the ache of all the little things I did that once meant something and now mean nothing at all. The day I stopped ironing for him, I cried in the laundry room, not because I was giving up, but because it was the last small ritual of love I still had. I folded the ironing board with shaking hands, pressed the iron off, and stood there for a long time, not moving, just breathing. It wasn't the shirt that mattered. It was the intention behind it, the care, the hope that something so small could carry meaning. And now I write. I write to pour all those unspoken gestures somewhere. The diary listens. The ink absorbs what his heart no longer does. And sometimes I wonder if he found these pages, would he feel regret? Would he realize what faded while he was looking elsewhere? Or would he shrug, like he always does, and say, "You're overthinking again"? I hope he never finds them. I hope he does. I don't know which would hurt less. But I do know this: the shirt still hangs there, and I still pause before it, sometimes fingers brushing the fabric, remembering what it used to smell like. And in that moment, I am both the woman who loved and the woman who learned to stop offering love where it no longer has a place to land. The table is still set for two. I can't bring myself to change that, even though most nights I eat alone. He's here somewhere in the house, in the garage, or in the back room with the television turned too loud, but not with me, not where he used to be. I light the candle anyway, just one now. I used to light two. I don't know why I bother. He never comments, never notices, but there's something about the flicker that feels like company, a tiny rebellion against being completely alone. I make the same meals I've always made, Roast chicken on Sundays, lentil soup on Wednesdays. Sometimes I even bake. The smell of bread rising used to draw him into the kitchen like a magnet. He'd pull a chair up, steal a slice before it cooled, and kiss the top of my head like I was magic. Now he doesn't even ask what's for dinner. He eats, if he eats, without saying a word. There was a night I made his favorite meatloaf with mashed potatoes, just the way his mother used to make it. I plated it neatly, added a sprig of parsley, even though I knew he wouldn't care. He came in, looked at the food, then said, "I already ate." That was it. No thank you, no apology, just walked past me like I was the breeze. I sat down anyway across from the empty chair. I couldn't eat. I just stared at the steam rising from the plate. That kind of rejection, it doesn't scream. It whispers. And the whisper gets inside your bones. I didn't throw the plate. I didn't cry. I put the food in containers and stacked them in the fridge. The fridge is full of leftovers these days. Unshared meals, unloved efforts. I eat them later quietly like a woman feeding a ghost. There's something sacred about cooking for someone. It's not just about food. It's a way of saying I care enough to nourish you. And when that gesture is returned with indifference, it chips away at the giver. Sometimes I imagine a version of myself who stands up, slams the plate on the table, and says, "Eat or don't eat, but don't act like I don't exist." But that woman lives only in my head. The real me just retreats, quietly, slowly. One evening I wrote in my diary while the chicken roasted. The house smelled warm and rich, but the silence was heavier than any aroma. I wrote, I wonder what it would feel like to be looked at again, not with annoyance or routine, but with awe, like I'm someone who still matters. It wasn't always this way. I remember dinners when we couldn't stop talking. We'd stay at the table long after the plates were cleared, hands tangled across the wood, laughing at nothing. He used to say he could live on my laugh alone. I sometimes still hear the echo of that sentence, and it makes the quiet feel cruel. Now I eat quickly. I wash the dishes before they've cooled. I don't play music in the kitchen anymore. Music feels like it's mocking me. There was one night I tried to invite him to sit with me. I called to him softly, "Dinner's ready, love." I added the love as a kind of olive branch, hoping it might reach someplace inside him that remembered. He came in, saw the table set, and said, "Why so formal?" It wasn't formal. It was desperate. But I said nothing. We ate in silence. His fork scraped against the plate like a clock ticking down. Afterward, I sat there long after he'd gone. I looked across the table and saw no one, felt no one. And I realized I had begun grieving a man who was still alive, still walking around this house, still eating my food, but who no longer dined with me. I still cook, still set the table, still light a candle. Not for him anymore, for me. Because if I stop doing these small things, I might vanish entirely, and I've already given up too much to let that happen. So I write. After dinner before bed, I write. I tell my diary what I would have said to him, how the stew turned out, how the air smelled like rain, how the sunset made the kitchen window blush pink, and though he doesn't listen, the pages do. And somehow that's enough to keep me warm through another dinner for two eaten by one. The phone used to ring, not just for him, for both of us. Friends, family, neighbors, calling to check in, to share a recipe, to ask if we were coming to church on Sunday. And he used to call me too, even just to say he'd be late or that he missed me. Now the phone sits like an ornament, dusty, still. I charge it out of habit. I glance at it, but it doesn't light up the way it used to. I remember the last time he called me just to talk. It was years ago. I was out shopping and he wanted to hear my voice. He said, "I miss your laugh today." That memory feels borrowed now, like it belongs to another woman in another life. Because the man who lives in this house now doesn't miss my laugh. He barely reacts when I speak. If the phone rings now, it's a robocall, or one of those endless appointment reminders, nothing that wants me. There was a time I'd get excited just hearing the sound of it. I'd rush to answer, brush my hair back instinctively, even if I was home alone, because hearing from him made me feel seen, important, necessary. But slowly the calls stopped, then the texts. Now even when he's out late, he doesn't let me know. He comes and goes like a tenant. No explanations, just presence and absence like the tide, indifferent and unstoppable. Once I tried calling him while he was out just to ask if he wanted something from the store. He answered with a clipped, "What's wrong?" That's all he said. No hello, no warmth, just suspicion. As if my voice was an interruption, not a comfort. I hung up and told myself not to call again unless it was urgent. But the truth is, I never called again, at all. Now I keep the phone beside me on the couch like a pet I've grown fond of despite its silence. I glance at it every now and then, as though expecting some miracle, a message, a check-in, someone asking how I am. It stays dark. There's a loneliness in knowing no one wonders where you are. No one needs your voice to feel okay. I sometimes think I could vanish for a day, 2, 3, and he might not even notice. He might ask eventually where I'd gone, but only because he needed something. A sock, a meal, not me, just the things I do. I once wrote in my diary, I miss being missed. I miss being someone whose absence left a shadow. There was a day a few months ago when I didn't feel well. I lay on the couch waiting for him to notice. I didn't say anything. I just wanted to see if he would look up, ask if I was all right, put a blanket over my feet like he used to. But he didn't. Hours passed. He sat across the room staring at a screen, and I curled into myself like a question mark. Later, when I finally stood up and went to bed early, he said, "You're sleeping already?" I nodded. He didn't ask why. That night, I dreamed the phone rang. It was him, his voice young again, bright and tender. He said, "Come outside. The stars are perfect tonight." I woke up with tears on my face. In the morning, the phone was still there, quiet, cold, like a reminder, like a dare. So I write. I write to be heard by something, even if it's only the paper. I write what I wish someone would ask me. "Are you okay? What are you thinking about? Do you want to talk?" I answer them all in long looping sentences that spill across the pages like water I've kept in too long. I keep the phone charged, though, not because I expect him to call, but because I want to believe that someone somewhere might think of me long enough to reach out. It's a strange kind of hope, the kind that doesn't shout or plead. It just sits quietly in the corner of your chest, flickering, refusing to die. Our wedding anniversary came and went last month. 42 years. I remembered before I even opened my eyes that morning. It lived in my bones, like a quiet alarm clock only I could hear. I laid there for a long time, watching the ceiling, letting memories flicker across my mind like an old film reel. The dress, the cake, the way he cried when I walked toward him. He didn't say a word, not that morning, not that night. I waited, of course. I baked the small lemon cake he always used to love, even though he hadn't asked for it in years. I found the silver-plated photo frame from our wedding day and set it gently on the table, like it might jog his memory. I wore the soft lilac blouse he once said brought out the gold in my eyes. He came home, dropped his keys in the bowl, and walked past it all, past the photo, past the cake, past me. He didn't even glance. We ate in silence, as we often do now. He complimented the chicken, which almost hurt more. Not because it wasn't kind, but because it meant he noticed the dinner, but not the day. not the date that once defined the best part of his life. After he went to bed, I sat at the kitchen table and stared at the untouched slice of cake across from mine. I whispered to it like it was a person. "We made it this far," I said, "but I'm not sure where we are anymore." In my diary that night I wrote, "A marriage doesn't die with a shout. It dies when anniversaries become regular Tuesdays." I remember our 10th anniversary. He surprised me with a picnic under the stars. We danced barefoot on a blanket in the grass while fireflies blinked around us. He had memorized a poem, a real poem, and recited it to me with such trembling sincerity that I cried. Back then, I thought we'd always be that version of us. I didn't know then how soft love can grow before it disappears, how routine can strangle the wonder, how being chosen once doesn't mean you'll be cherished forever. This year, I sat in our bedroom after he fell asleep. The cake still untouched on the table, the flowers I'd bought myself wilting in their vase. I watched his back rise and fall, with each breath the shape of a man I once thought I couldn't live without, and I felt more alone than I ever had in my life. I didn't wake him. I didn't cry. I just sat there with my hands folded in my lap, listening to the hush of the room, the tick of the clock, and I wondered how many other women were sitting in their dark bedrooms, remembering anniversaries alone. I could have reminded him. I could have said, "Do you know what today is?" But I didn't want to beg for acknowledgement. I didn't want a forced apology or a quick, "Oh, I'm sorry." "Happy anniversary," he said, like it was a line on a to-do list. I wanted it to matter. I wanted it to be remembered on its own because that's what love used to do, it remembered. Now I carry the dates alone, the birthdays, the milestones, the little markers of a life shared, and when they come I sit with them like old friends who've grown quiet. I mark them in ink, not celebration. There's a power, though, in noticing things no one else does. A sad power, yes, but also a kind of resilience. I keep remembering even when he forgets. I keep honoring what we once were, even if he's turned away from it. I write about our anniversaries now. I write down the details, the colors, the sounds, the smells. I preserve what he lets fade. Not because I want to keep the illusion alive, but because I refuse to let my love disappear without a trace. Even if I was the only one who remembered this year, at least someone did, and maybe that's enough. I remember the last time I wrote him a love letter, a real one, not a diary entry, not a quiet musing, a letter folded neatly kissed at the seal left in his drawer, where he'd be sure to find it. It was a Tuesday. I'd watched him leave for work that morning, shoulders slumped, his mouth barely forming a goodbye. I wanted to remind him, not of me necessarily, but of us, of the warmth we used to carry like a second skin. I wrote it slowly, every word chosen like a stone placed carefully in a garden. I still remember how you used to look at me like I was the answer to something you'd been asking all your life. I included a story from when we were young, something about a thunderstorm, and how we once ran barefoot in the rain, laughing like children. I reminded him that the rain didn't scare me because his hand was in mine. I even wrote at the end, "We've come so far, haven't we? I still want to walk beside you, even in silence, but I miss your voice." I tucked it under his belt in the drawer, thinking maybe it would pull something from him. Even a smile, even a glance across the dinner table that lingered a little longer than usual. But he never said anything, never looked at me differently. Days passed, then a week. The letter never came up. One morning I opened the drawer while putting away laundry, and there it was still sealed, untouched, pressed between his receipts and socks, like something irrelevant. I didn't cry. I just stood there, the laundry basket on my hip, looking at that envelope like it was the ghost of a last chance. I closed the drawer, quietly went back to folding towels, and said nothing. That was the moment. Not when he ignored the anniversary. Not when he stopped saying, "I love you." It was that drawer, that envelope, that silence. That was when I knew I couldn't write to him anymore. Not because I didn't love him, but because my love had nowhere left to go. That night I wrote a different kind of letter. To myself. I started it like this: "Dear woman who still believes in tenderness even when it isn't returned, I see you. You are not invisible." I've written dozens of letters like that since. None of them for him. They sit in a different drawer now, wrapped in blue ribbon, each one a lifeline. Sometimes I wonder if he'd even recognize my handwriting anymore. It's changed, softer, slower. There's a weariness in the curves now, like even the ink has grown tired. But still I write. There was a day I almost confronted him. I stood in the hallway, letter in hand, heart full of old bruises, ready to ask, "Did you even read it?" But I didn't, because I knew the answer wouldn't heal me. I didn't want a quick apology. I didn't want pity. I wanted then. I wanted a man who had already left. So I kissed the envelope, gently whispered goodbye, and tucked it away like a relic. I don't write love letters anymore. Not the way I used to. But sometimes I imagine what I would say if I did. Not to him. To someone who listens. Someone who leans in, who asks follow-up questions. Someone who sees the candle on the table and knows it means something. And maybe that someone is me. The woman who stayed when no one noticed. The woman who folded towels with a heart quietly breaking. The woman who still believes in writing, even when the words go unanswered. The love I have now, it's not loud. It's not public. It doesn't live in flowers or kisses or whispered nothings. It lives in the pages I fill each night, the space I carve out just for me. Ink has become my way of refusing to disappear. Every sentence is a declaration I am still here. I still feel. I still remember what it meant to love with my whole self. And that has to be enough. I didn't wake up one morning and decide to stop loving him. That's not how it works. Love doesn't vanish like that. It fades the way daylight disappears slowly, so slowly you hardly notice until you find yourself sitting in the dark. It was quiet the moment I stopped hoping. There was no argument, no slammed door, no single unforgivable thing. It was a Tuesday, or maybe a Thursday. The day itself doesn't matter. What matters is the feeling. He had left his plate in the sink again. He does that now, as if the act of rinsing it is some great burden. I'd just finished wiping down the counters, already tired from the weight of another day spent in silence. I looked at that plate, and something in me just stopped. It wasn't the plate, of course. It was the years stacked behind it. The anniversaries he forgot, the conversations that turned to air, the letters that went unread. I stood there with the dishcloth in my hand and felt a stillness settle over me. A stillness that said, "This is not love anymore. This is maintenance." I didn't feel rage. I didn't even feel sadness. I felt something deeper, a hollowing out, the way the tide quietly pulls away from the shore, leaving behind only shells and silence. That night, I didn't wait for him to join me on the couch. I didn't light the candle. I didn't try to make the evening feel like a scene from our past. I sat in bed with my diary and wrote, "I have been waiting to be seen for so long I forgot what it feels like to see myself." Something shifted inside me, not loudly but clearly. A gentle release, a kind of acceptance. I wasn't angry with him anymore. I wasn't even disappointed. I just saw the truth finally, without squinting to make it look like something else. He still says goodnight most evenings, but it sounds like an afterthought, like a habit, not a sentiment. I say it back because I still believe in kindness, but the words fall between us like leaves light pretty, but already dead. I've stopped dressing for him. Stopped asking him if he likes my hair this way or that. I used to care what he thought. Now I dress for softness, for warmth, for the woman who still lives beneath the wrinkles and the weary smile. There was a time I curled my eyelashes and picked out earrings with him in mind. Now I choose sweaters that feel like safety, socks that don't slip. I put lotion on my hands at night and whisper thank you to them, these hands that have held, cleaned, cooked, comforted, begged. These hands that still write even when no one asks what they're writing. The moment I stopped hoping wasn't dramatic. It was sacred. It was me reclaiming something I hadn't realized I'd given away, the part of me that believed love was a transaction, that if I gave enough, tried enough, stayed, gentle enough, he would return. He didn't. And yet I'm still here, still breathing, still finding beauty in the way the curtain flutters when the window is cracked, or how the morning light catches the rim of my teacup just right. Hope didn't die that day. It just changed shape. It stopped being about him and started being about me. Now I hope for quieter things, for peace, for stillness that doesn't ache, for days where I don't measure my worth by someone else's noticing. I still write, not for him, not anymore. But the habit is too deep now to break. My diary has become a witness, a companion, the place where I say all the things I once said aloud. And sometimes I reread what I've written not to relive it, but to remind myself that I survived it, that I lived through the slow vanishing of a love that once lit me like fire and emerged not unburned but still breathing. There's a strange comfort in the quiet scratch of pen on paper, at night when the house is still and the only sounds are the ticking of the hallway clock and the distant hum of the refrigerator. I open my diary and begin to write. The pages don't flinch when I'm too honest. They don't sigh or look away. They hold me completely without question. This diary knows everything. The pages are stained with things I've never spoken aloud, not even to my reflection. I write the things I wish he would ask about. I write the answers I wish I could give without being met with silence. It began as a small notebook I kept tucked beneath the bed. I didn't mean for it to become a ritual, but one night after another dinner eaten in silence, after he turned off the lamp and rolled away from me, without a word I needed somewhere to put my ache. I couldn't cry again. I couldn't lie awake rehearsing another conversation that would never happen. So I opened the blank page and began. Tonight I wanted to ask him if he ever missed the way we used to sit on the porch and plan dreams we didn't have the money for. I wanted to ask if he still remembers how we kissed in the car like teenagers pretending not to care who was watching. But I didn't, because he wouldn't know how to answer. And I'm tired of speaking into rooms that only echo back my own voice. From then on, the diary became my sanctuary. I started keeping track of my emotions like weather patterns. Cloudy today. Sun broke through when the wind smelled like rosemary. Thunderstorm at 7:43 p.m. when he walked past me without looking up. I began writing letters to my younger self, the girl who used to believe that being good and kind would always be enough. I told her she was still worthy, even if no one said it out loud anymore. I wrote about the small joys I still allowed myself, the first sip of hot tea, the rustle of bed sheets that had dried in the sun, the comfort of old flannel pajamas. I even wrote to him sometimes in a separate part of the diary I labeled unsent. I didn't do it to stir pain. I did it because some parts of love still lived in me, and they needed somewhere to rest. I wrote things like, I saw a woman in the grocery store today holding her husband's hand while they laughed about bread, and I wanted to shake you. I wanted to ask why we lost that. I wanted to beg you to remember who we were, but instead I bought the bread, came home, and didn't say a word. There's power in that kind of honesty, the kind that doesn't ask for permission or reaction. just truth. Raw, unfiltered, vulnerable truth. My diary knows about the nights I dreamed of someone holding me just to hold me. No expectations, no history, just arms that felt like safety. It knows about the day I walked past the mirror and didn't recognize myself, not because I looked older, but because I looked so terribly lonely. It also knows my quiet victories. The day I went to the market and smiled at a stranger who smiled back. The morning I danced in the kitchen alone just because the song reminded me of who I used to be before I shrank myself for someone else's comfort. I no longer hide the diary. It sits on my nightstand now like an old friend I no longer feel ashamed to be seen with. Sometimes I wonder what would happen if he opened it, if he read even a page. Would it reach him? Would it stir something? Would he feel the shape of what he's forgotten? But deep down, I know he never will. He's not curious about my inner world anymore. He doesn't ask where my mind goes when I get quiet. He doesn't see the way my fingers pause over my teacup like they're holding a memory. So I write, because I need to, because somewhere inside me there's still a woman who believes her voice matters, even if no one listens out loud. And maybe that's what love looks like now, not being heard but still speaking, not being held but still feeling, not being remembered but still remembering. There's a coldness to his side of the bed that never used to be there. It isn't just about temperature, it's the emptiness of it. The way the sheets don't hold the shape of his body anymore. He still sleeps there most nights, but his presence feels more like a habit than a closeness, a ghost of intimacy, not the thing itself. He doesn't reach for me, not in sleep, not in waking. Sometimes I lie awake and remember the way he used to curl toward me in the middle of the night, his hand searching in the dark until it found mine. The way his breath against the back of my neck felt like the softest promise. Now he sleeps turned away, always away, his back a wall I've learned not to climb. I've stopped reaching for him, not out of spite, but preservation. Because the ache of an unanswered touch is worse than no touch at all. I curl up with my pillow, tuck my hands close to my chest and breathe slowly, quietly, like a woman who's trying not to wake something that's already gone. There was a night not long ago when I had a bad dream, something about falling, something about being left behind. I woke up in a panic, heart racing, eyes wet. I turned toward him instinctively, a reflex born from years of comfort. But he didn't stir. I whispered his name. Nothing. I lay there staring at the back of his head, and the loneliness in that moment nearly swallowed me whole. The next morning, I didn't tell him. What would be the point? He'd offer a distracted nod, maybe a mumbled, "Sorry you had a rough night," before returning to his newspaper or the television, so I wrote it down instead. In my diary I wrote, "He used to hold me when I trembled. Now he sleeps through the storm." The distance between our bodies has grown over the years, but it's the emotional distance that stretches further. He used to notice things, the way I twisted my ring when I was anxious, the way I hummed when I was content. Now I could go silent for hours and he wouldn't ask why. There was a time I'd try to bridge that gap. I'd slip my foot beneath his under the covers, hoping for a wordless kind of connection. But he'd shift away, not harshly, just unconsciously, like his body was protecting itself from something it didn't even recognize anymore. I miss the feeling of being needed, desired, held. But even more than that, I miss being seen. The way he used to look at me, not just with affection, but with knowing. Like he understood something about me no one else did. I saw an old couple in the park the other day. She had a scarf tied around her hair. He carried a little thermos. They didn't talk much, but they sat close, really close. His hand rested on her knee like it belonged there, like it always had. I watched them for a long time and thought, that could have been us. That should have been us. Instead, we are strangers who share a bed out of habit. I don't cry about it much anymore. There's a kind of grief that burns out its own flame. What's left is ash, soft, quiet, undramatic. But sometimes I still miss him so much it aches. Not this version of him. The him that once existed. The one who tucked my hair behind my ear and whispered that he couldn't believe I chose him. The one who wrote me notes in sloppy handwriting, left them under my pillow like secrets. I don't expect that man to return. I'm not naive, but I do mourn him. I mourn us. Now when I climb into bed, I take my diary with me. I hold it against my chest like a lifeline, and I write before the lights go out. I write because I need someone to hold the weight of what I carry, and he no longer can. Some nights I wonder if he feels it too, the space between us, the quietness, the absence. But if he does, he never says. And I've grown tired of being the only one who notices. Sometimes I play a game with myself. I imagine what I would say to him if he suddenly turned to me. One evening looked me in the eyes, really looked, and said, "Tell me what I've missed." The words line up in my mind like children waiting to be picked, but they never get their chance. Still, I rehearse them in the quiet, in the bath, while folding towels, while stirring soup. I whisper them to the steam, to the fabric, to the onions sizzling in the pan. I speak the truth to everything but him. I'd tell him I've been lonely, not the kind of loneliness that comes from being alone, but the kind that swells when someone is inches away and still unreachable. I'd tell him I miss his voice when it was just for me. I miss the way he used to listen like every word I said might hold a treasure. I would say, "You don't see me anymore. You don't ask how I'm feeling, what I'm thinking, who I'm becoming now that the years have worn the edges of me smooth. You used to care. You used to chase my thoughts like fireflies. Now you sit beside me in silence, and I feel like I'm vanishing in plain sight." But those words stay locked in my chest, because I already know what would happen if I spoke them. He'd grow uncomfortable, dismissive, say something like, "You're overthinking again," or worse, he'd stay quiet, that vast, emotionless quiet that answers nothing and explains even less. So instead, I write them. The pages of my diary carry all the unsaid conversations. I reread them sometimes wondering if I sound bitter or just broken. But what I see on those pages isn't anger. It's longing. It's the voice of a woman who still wants to be chosen. Not out of desperation, but out of memory. Because I remember what it felt like to be looked at with adoration. To be wanted not for the dinner I made, or the laundry I folded, but for the sparkle in my eye when I told a story, or the curve of my laugh when I was caught off guard. We used to stay up talking until the clocks grew embarrassed. We used to solve each other like mysteries, every thought, every fear, every secret folded gently between our palms. Now, if I say something vulnerable, he just nods, or worse, he changes the subject. And I'm left holding my own words like a child holding a crumpled gift that was just returned. I used to ask him what he was thinking. Now I don't, because I'm afraid of the answer, or of no answer at all. One night, not long ago, I asked if he remembered the first time he told me he loved me. He blinked, paused, and said, "I think it was in the car." Then he returned to watching television. He was wrong. It was in the hallway of my apartment while I was crying over a rejection letter, and he held me so tightly I forgot how to hurt. He looked at me and said, "I love you. Not because you succeed, just because you're you." I didn't correct him. What would be the point? So I wrote it down that night, the real story, the real moment. I wrote it to keep it alive. Not for him, for me. Because it matters. Because I don't want my life to become a story only half remembered by someone who no longer tries. Sometimes I wonder what would happen if I printed all my diary entries and left them on his pillow. Would he read them? Would he feel sorrow? Shame? Would he feel anything at all? And then I wonder, why should it matter? Why am I still yearning for the validation of a man who let go of the thread while I kept tying knots with trembling hands? The truth is, I'm not waiting for him to see me anymore. Not really. I'm learning how to see myself again, to speak out loud when I'm alone in the kitchen, to sing to the window, to laugh at something silly and let that be enough. But I still play the game sometimes. I still imagine him asking. And when he doesn't, I go to my diary, and I write, "This is what I would have said." I don't know when it happened exactly, the moment I stopped recognizing the woman in the mirror. Not just her face, which has softened with time, but her posture, her eyes, her silence. She looked like someone waiting, always waiting. There was a day not long ago when I caught my reflection by accident. I was brushing my hair, something I still do slowly, like it's an act of care, even if no one's watching. I saw myself in the mirror and paused. Not because I looked older, that part I've made peace with, but because I looked absent, like I had stepped out of my own life and left the body behind to go through the motions. I used to be strong. I used to laugh loudly, throw my arms around people I loved, dance in the kitchen with flour on my cheeks. I used to cry openly and fiercely when I felt something deeply. Now my laughter is a whisper, my movements are careful, and my tears only come when I'm alone with the pages. He doesn't ask if I'm okay. Not because he doesn't care, maybe. Maybe because he doesn't know how. But the silence has shaped me. It's carved away the parts of me that used to be bright, and now I live like a shadow of the woman I once was. But not entirely, because lately, just lately, I've started to see her again. Little glimpses, like when I hum to myself while folding laundry and realize the tune is from our wedding day, or when I plant new herbs by the kitchen window and find joy in watching something grow, or when I laugh, really laugh at a line in a book and feel it echo in my ribs. She's not gone the woman I used to be. She's just been quiet, waiting. There was a moment last week when I stood at the mirror again, not brushing my hair, not fixing anything, just looking. I stared at myself and whispered, "There you are," and I meant it. I'm not her yet, not fully, but I'm remembering how it felt to move through the world without apology, remembering how I used to speak with conviction, how I used to take up space. For so long I tried to become smaller to keep the peace. I silenced my own needs to make room for his indifference. I dulled my shine because it made him uncomfortable. But what if I stopped doing that? What if I gave myself permission to be fully here again, unmuted, unshrinking, unfinished? I've started taking walks alone, not just around the block, but through the parts of town I used to love. I stop in front of shop windows. I buy myself a small pastry or a book without needing to justify it. I let the sun touch my face and don't look over my shoulder. He never asks where I go. And for the first time, I'm glad. Because this new space I'm creating, this soft quiet, reclaiming it's mine, not in rebellion but in recognition. I'm not trying to become someone else. I'm trying to come back to myself. The woman in the mirror is tired, yes. She's weathered. But she's also still here, still curious, still tender, still powerful in a way that doesn't need to be loud to be real. I wrote in my diary that night, I am not disappearing. I am unfolding, slowly, carefully, like something that thought it was lost finding the light again. And I meant every word. I still write, but not to him, not anymore. What once began as love letters folded with trembling hands has become something else entirely, not desperate, not seeking, but honest, pure, a quiet defiance against fading. The ink is my witness now, my rebellion, my truth. I no longer write hoping to be read. I write to remember that I still feel, that I still know how to speak, even if no one listens, that I still matter, even if only to the pages I fill. Tonight I sat at the kitchen table with my diary open and the candle burning low. The house was quiet, as it always is. He was in the next room, watching something that didn't include me in a life that doesn't ask for my thoughts anymore. And I realized I wasn't waiting for him to look up. Not this time. There was peace in that. Not joy, not yet, but peace. I wrote a poem tonight, the kind I haven't written in years. It wasn't about him. It was about me, about a woman who walked through decades, with her hands full of offerings, who gave and is just now learning how to give to herself. It went like this. I used to write to be held. Now I write to stand still, to feel the earth beneath me, and know I haven't disappeared. I folded the page, gently kissed the corner out of habit, and tucked it away. Not for anyone, just to mark the moment. I looked around the room and saw everything differently. The same furniture, the same teacup, the same lamp, but through clearer eyes, eyes no longer searching for him to see me. He walked into the room just as I was closing the diary. We exchanged a nod, no words, and that was fine. For once, it was enough, because something has shifted in me. The woman who once poured herself into someone else like water into a cracked cup is learning to drink from her own hands. I still carry love, but it doesn't ache the way it used to. It no longer begs. It no longer bleeds. Now it simply is, a steady flame, not burning for someone else, burning because that's what it does. I wrote one last line before bed tonight. I used to write love letters. Now I write reminders that I'm still here, that I still belong to myself. And when I turned off the lamp, I didn't feel empty. I felt whole. So here I am now on the other side of the quiet, a little older, a little worn, but not broken. Not anymore. The stillness of my life no longer feels like punishment. It feels like space, like breathing room, like the soft curve of a sentence written just for me. I've learned that love doesn't have to end in anger to end. Sometimes it just dissolves, leaving behind the bones of who you were and the soft question of who you might become. I've held that question gently night after night, with ink-stained fingers and a heart that still remembers how to beat in its own rhythm. There is grief, yes, but there is also grace in learning to sit with myself, in remembering the sound of my own voice, in trusting that I was never meant to disappear just because someone else stopped seeing me. I still write. I will always write, because these words are the way I come home to myself, the way I rebuild what was lost, not the marriage, not the years, but the quiet sanctuary inside me that still believes in beauty, in stillness, in soft rebellion. I don't need to be loud. I don't need to be asked. I don't need to be rescued. I gave them silence, and in it I found peace.